Number 10. Taken. School is supposed to be a safe place, right? What happens when it feels very unsafe? This story was submitted to a Reddit thread by an anonymous user. The Redditor explains what occurred on the day his school went into lockdown. We were outside on the playground after lunch when we were rapidly herded inside. The teachers kept saying that it was fine, nothing to worry about, but they looked terrified, the Redditor writes. He goes on to explain that they were ordered to sit and read for nearly 2 hours in an area not within view of the door, and then inexplicably at the end of the day, the students were sent home without explanation as to what happened. At least, no explanation was given to the children. Parents were provided a form letter, which the curious Redditor read as he walked home. As it turns out, an area elementary school had been the target of a deranged individual, and 2 more times would this person attempt to take a student at this Redditor school. Who was the culprit? A father without custody who planned to flee the state with his children, and he tried to do so well armed. Luckily, the first elementary school immediately jumped into action. After the bad dad took his first kid, the school alerted other area schools and the cops, who were all waiting for the man when he arrived. Although the man was armed and apparently desperate, he must have known on some level that further confrontation with the cops would not end well for him, so he came quietly. Thankfully, this one didn't end horribly, but nonetheless it must have been terrifying for both students and teachers. Number 9. The nail. Have you ever swallowed a nail? We highly recommend never attempting it. Redditor Paul Shinfo has though, but it's not the kind you're thinking. Shinfo was young when he swallowed a nail in the middle of class and had to tell his teacher what he'd done because it was hurting him. Of course, the school called an ambulance and told the kid that the nail could rip through his stomach and may even take his life. Although that's not very nice to tell a kid that. He didn't have to live through this super long. In Shinfo's own words, I was so terrified I thought I was going to pass away. I couldn't stop crying and then went into mild shock. After they called the ambulance, I had to describe the nail, and I perfectly described my big toenail. I used to take my socks off in the toilet and chew my toenails, obviously not knowing that the concerned adults thought he was talking about a carpentry nail. Shinfo had worried them beyond belief. Number 8. Lost. Who hasn't gotten lost as a child? When you're little, getting lost is very scary. But as an adult, can you imagine how the adults responsible for you must feel? Redditor Rotax75 muses about how the following incident must have freaked his parents out. A little background. The Redditor would stay at the neighbor's house during the morning. As his kindergarten was in the afternoon and his parents worked, he'd then go home with the rest of his siblings who were in school full time. So after lunch one day, the boy thought he'd heard his school bus leave without him, and thinking he missed it, he hitched a ride with the neighbor, who dropped him off in front of the school and left. There was no clear sight of the school playground from the drop-off area, so the neighbor had no idea what she was leaving him with. The school playground was absolutely empty. No one was there. It was usually full at this time, so finding the place abandoned freaked the child Redditor out. So the practical thing to do, or so the boy thought, was to return home. He started walking. He thought he knew the way. Imagine being in kindergarten, finding an empty school playground, and then attempting to walk home. Of course, the Redditor immediately got lost. According to him, I got out of the neighborhood that the school was in and realized that it took a lot longer to walk than drive there. But never fear, Rotak ran into another neighbor who was leaving the grocery store at the time. After flagging her down, the woman returned the boy to school. Why did all this happen? because our dear friend had mistaken the sound of a garbage truck with his school bus. So after thinking he'd missed it, he actually arrived much earlier to school than usual. While this story had a happy ending, it could have gone downhill fast. As they say, it takes a village. Number 7. The individual. There has been and always will be the strange kid in class, the type that stands out from the pack, but sadly not in a good way. Redditor Lola Lodge shared a tale about her class oddball from high school. Lola mentions that this boy wasn't a cruel person, and really she felt for him. He just had some issues. Well, don't we all? Lola shared some classes with him, and she wrote that his antics sent him home on occasion. One of these antics was quite painful, literally. In Lola's own words, once he came to class and he had carved the letter I into his cheek with a razor. He said the I stood for individual, and this fellow was certainly an individual. Lola also tells when the class did Secret Santa, instead of offering some chocolates or socks or some more thoughtful gift, like any regular Santa would do, he gave his recipients some odd fingernail and toenail clippings. Why? Because he wanted to give a part of himself. Cue the collective shuddering. Redditor Sarah the Lizard jacks up that shuddering in the comments to 20 decibels, writing, "He should have given him a human foot. It's the ultimate stocking stuffer. Talk about a nightmare before Christmas." Number 6. Toilet water. You have the individuals, then you have the toilet water drinkers. Chewy Ubleck shared his account with the oddball in his middle school. According to Chewy, he did everything from drinking toilet water to throwing binders at the teacher. Further, Chewy says that when 8th grade wrapped up, they each had to present a speech in front of the school. His topic, the deep disliking he felt from everything from his classmates to the teachers to the school in its entirety. Apparently, there was a video posted of this speech at one point, but it was removed. Nevertheless, I don't think the student felt very safe when they returned to school after summer break. Number 5. Duck and cover. Sometimes it's not the people that are scary. Nature can take the lead in creating terror at school. Need an example? Redditor Need More Cow Ben has a scary tale. Let's set the scene. It was high school, junior year, 5th period English class. The Redditor's best friend had his phone out and was browsing Twitter, as one does in 5th period English class, and he scrolled past a local weatherman's tweet about severe storms on the horizon. Being that such weather was normal for the area and the season, the warning wasn't something to write home about, but Ben and his friend wanted to get out of schoolwork, so they started the distract the teacher tactics. According to Ben, our teacher loved me and my friend, so when we told her about it, she effectively said, "Well, forget class today, we're watching the weather," and turned on the local news station. Thinking they'd just spend their class time waiting out a very mild storm while effectively avoiding schoolwork, they kicked back and relaxed. That is, until the weather reports took an even scarier turn. The storm was causing damage, and their school was in its direct path. Instead of battening down the hatches, the entire school started watching the news as the storm raged outside. The class period came to a close, and the principal was heard over the PA system, telling everyone to move on to their next class. He mentioned that the storm was being carefully watched, but once they arrived at their next classroom, which was upstairs in the building, the principal shouted orders over the intercom to duck and cover. Our friend Ben raced back downstairs and found everyone under their desks. He dived under with them and waited out the storm. Luckily for the school, the hailstorm moved a hair's breadth south of the building. Unlucky for anyone who owned a car in the vicinity, 100+ vehicles were either severely damaged or totaled, according to Ben. Apparently, the storm was so damaging that it made both the national and international news. The moral of the story: sometimes distracting your teacher is a good thing. Now that is something to write home about. Number 4. Tornado Alley. When you attend a school in Tornado Alley, you're almost guaranteed to be blown away. Redditor Totally Not From Ennis told of his experience with tornado season in Texas. He was in junior high when a storm came rolling in. This weather was normal for April in Texas, but most of the time the thunderstorms were mainly benign and lasted only around 30 minutes. This storm, though, everyone was made to bunker down in the school hallways, away from windows and doors. They were told to crouch along the wall in a fetal position, faces downwards, hands over the head. They were forced to stay in this for an hour and a half. That's one deep squat. Imagine the cramping. After a while, the tornado sirens went mute and students were allowed to leave the building. But just as they were set loose, a tornado spiraled down to earth in the school's football field a few hundred yards away. The students had headed to the courtyard of the school, where their parents were waiting to pick them up, but the school staff all went berserk and shouted for the kids to come back inside. Our hero didn't want to return to that deep squat though. In his own words, "I decided to make a run for it and get into my mom's car that's been waiting for me for the past half hour." Along with the hundreds of other panicked parents, that sprint from the door to my mom's car with the tornado forming in the corner of my eye was one of the most surreal and frightening moments I've ever experienced while being within a mile of a school. Being chased to your parents' vehicle by a tornado, surreal is right. Number 3. Lockdown. All too often nowadays, schools go into lockdown over potentially dangerous situations. Well, sometimes it's a false alarm, other times it's most certainly not. This one falls into the latter category. Redditor put his glasses on, wrote about his elementary school's lockdown. Apparently, teachers were not yet trained well enough to handle these types of situations. According to the Redditor, this particular teacher was also a newbie and didn't know what to do. So instead of playing it cool with a room full of small children, she explained to them exactly what was going on. A strange man had been seen on school grounds and appeared to be armed, being that the Redditor's classroom was not in the main school building, but rather in a trailer outside. Their class was even more vulnerable. The teacher locked the trailer's doors and then disappeared into the neighboring classroom of the trailer building to talk to a colleague. In the Redditor's own words, "We're all sitting there scared when I see a man with a trucker's hat pulled down, hiding his face, launch himself up all 5 steps leading to the door at once, and yank it so hard I am honestly still surprised he didn't rip it off its hinges." Was it the mysterious man? No, false alarm. It was just the janitor checking the doors on the outer classrooms as per orders from administration. But that didn't stop the classroom of children from screaming their heads off. Even the teacher was crying. Everyone thought that was it. The Redditor had an even sadder vision. "I just thought we were all going to pass away and that my mom would just sit in the car parking lot forever waiting on me." It's pretty sweet to worry about keeping your mom waiting at a time like that, but thankfully he didn't have to worry. It's unclear what happened with the armed man, but judging by the Redditor's omission of any further incident, it's safe to say everyone made it through the frightening situation. Number 2. The rejection. When you get a classmate who won't stop talking about his victimhood, you might start thinking it's time to report the guy, and if that's your gut instinct, listen to it. Redditor Arias 32 had a classmate who took a turn when he was rejected by a girl he had a crush on. According to the Redditor, he started sharing posts on MySpace, expressing how victimized he felt and how people heavily disliked him. He wrote that he wanted to make them stop. Arias and others were concerned about this express victimhood, and when the horrible events at Virginia Tech happened shortly after, that concern grew. In Arias' own words, we realized that what he was posting was a sanitized version of what Sung-Hai Cho had been writing/recording. Instead of sitting and waiting to see how this would play out, Arias and others reported the man to administration, but only after that guy had posted, Ave Maria would make a great soundtrack to take lives at a school. The police were alerted by school officials about this post, and after obtaining a warrant, they searched the man's house, where they found loads of arms and notebooks with plans for his spree, including angles and a list of targets. Although the man was held under a mental evaluation for a brief period, he wasn't charged. Who knows what became of him? Many in the comments praised Arias for taking the steps to report this man. As they say, if you see something, say something. You may just be preventing the next terrible school event. Before we get to number 1, my name is Chills and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you're curious about what I look like in real life, then go to my Instagram at DylanIsChillinYT and tap that follow button to find out. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person, so if you're generous enough to hit that subscribe button and the bell beside it, then thank you. This way, you'll be notified of the new video we upload every Tuesday. Number 1. Rabid Dog. If you didn't have a fear of rabid dogs after reading Stephen King's Cujo, you might just after hearing this story. Redditor What Is This wrote of a time when she was 7 or 8 and got sent home from school by government officials because there was a rabid dog loose in the area. Not sure why they wouldn't keep the kids in class, where they were safe and sound, but the Redditor wrote that she lived just next door, so it wasn't a terribly long walk. She did, however, have to enter through the apartment complex's gate, and then walk a couple blocks to get to her apartment. She was wearing her school uniform, which included a long skirt. After entering the gate, she felt a tug on that skirt. Thinking it was just the way it was hanging, she continued walking, but she felt another tug. She finally turned around. In her own words, she saw the rabid dog, mouth frothing, eyes red, almost as big as me, chewing my skirt and tugging at it. The girl was in a tug of war with her life. She yanked, but the rabid dog had hold of it and pulled harder, growling. Because she knew she wouldn't win the tug of war, she outsmarted the beast by sliding out of it and racing into the first entrance she saw and up the stairs. The pound officials caught up with the dog and likely were able to subdue it, but not before our friend raced up several flights fearing for her life. In her own words, I had and still have many nightmares of the black dog with the red eyes and frothing mouth chase me through those staircases. And I am still to an extent afraid of all dogs. Due to the situation, it's completely